What's going on, everyone? Welcome back. Today, we have got another live fantasy football draft for you back on Yahoo, but this is a 10-team half-point PPR format, and we will be drafting from the final 10th spot, so should be pretty interesting. Now, before we get into it, since we have got some time, a quick reminder for everyone that's interested, go ahead, get yourself a copy of the 2020 ADP Fantasy Football Draft Guide, now available to everybody at a great price. It's got everything you could possibly want to get an edge on your competition. Top 150 overall player rankings in standard and PPR formats, individual player bios, tiers, projections, along with targets for breakout and bust candidates, along with general fantasy advice. All the details in the description. Check it out now. But with that being said, let's get into this draft because it has kicked off and we are already 3 picks in. And as you would expect, Christian McCaffrey and Saquon Barkley, the first 2 names off the board. And at this point, that's kind of become status quo. But what isn't status quo is the fact that Davante Adams is the first wide receiver off the board. A little bit strange. Now, I don't know if this is just a one-time hiccup or what, but we will see once this draft snakes back, because by all accounts, Michael Thomas should be the number 1 wide receiver. He is, in fact, the number 1 wide receiver across all formats. Now, I guess to be fair, Davante Adams is the number 2 guy, but it's still a pretty big separation between talent. So keep that in mind. This is definitely a one-off, but it's our turn to draft now. So as far as running backs available, I know that's the position that I want to hit half-point PPR, and Kenyon Drake does get a little bit of a bump here. Now, let's go ahead and look at some of our other running backs that are available to us. Kenyon Drake was our first pick. I've got Nick Chubb, Aaron Jones, Josh Jacobs, Austin Eckler, Miles Sanders. Really pretty much the only 5 names that I would be considering. Since I've already got someone like a Kenyon Drake, I'm crossing Eckler off the list, and I'm looking at Josh Jacobs, honestly. Nick Chubb is a possibility. It would either be Jacobs or Chubb. I'm going to go with Jacobs for the simple reason that Nick Chubb has got Kareem Hunt to contend with, and his ceiling for pass catching is extremely limited. So that's why right off from the get-go, we have got Kenyon Drake and Josh Jacobs as our 2 starting running backs, and I'm perfectly fine with that. Right at the turn, we've got our core running back situation taken care of. Now, since this is a 10-team league, be prepared for these teams to be a little deeper than usual compared to the 12-person leagues that we have done so far. So we could take this a little bit further in terms of filling out our bench players. Sometimes for people that are in 10-team leagues, they might have an extra flex spot. That isn't the case here per Yahoo's current format, so just something to think about. I personally have some leagues that are like that with an extra flex spot. But again, let's get back to our draft board, see what's been happening since our selection of Josh Jacobs. And you see Aaron Jones, Tyreek Hill, Nick Chubb. Kind of makes sense. They were the next names on the big board. DeAndre Hopkins, Miles Sanders. Sanders is an interesting guy that I was also considering if it wasn't Chubb or Josh Jacobs. I do like Sanders. I think he's going to have a much more expanded role in this offense for Philadelphia. So I really like that pick. I do think his ADP will steadily rise a couple of spots as we get closer to the season. Then you see Chris Godwin, George Kittle, Julio Jones with the 19th overall pick. That is absolutely bananas, guys. That is insane that Julio Jones, who is my personal number 2 overall wide receiver, was just taken 19th overall, which I guess if you compare it in 12-team leagues, that would be equivalent to the 7th pick in the 2nd round, which is still pretty late. I mean, Julio Jones is going usually in the first couple of picks in the 2nd round, and I could make the case that that even is a little bit late. But that's how this draft is folding out. Then, to kick off the 3rd round, you see Clyde Edwards-Helaire. I'm shocked that Clyde Edwards was taken before a guy like an Austin Eckler, for example. But let's get back to this big board because it is our turn to draft. There has been a bit of a run on wide receivers, but let's see what's left, because right from the get-go, there's a couple guys here that I really like. Adam Thielen is definitely one. With Stephon Diggs gone, I think Thielen is going to have a much more expanded role. Half-point PPR format, he's going to get some attention there. He's a big volume guy. So going back to our overall big board, I'm looking at some names here in Amari Cooper, Chris Carson, Cooper Kupp, Leonard Fournette, maybe a James Conner. But since we addressed the running back position pretty well, I'm going to go ahead and circle back on wide receiver. So basically 2 running backs in the first 2 rounds and then 2 wide receivers in the next 2. And I'm going to go with Amari Cooper here. It's between him and Cooper Kupp was my other option. You see A.J. Brown being drafted right afterwards, but this being a PPR format, even though it's half-point PPR, A.J. Brown does take a bit of a tumble in my rankings. Honestly, what I would have loved to have happened was to have Mike Evans, who was only 2 picks away from being available to us at the end of the 3rd round. That would have been awesome, because Mike Evans is an absolute, in my opinion, top 5 wide receiver potential, yet he is being extremely undervalued. I understand what Chris Godwin just did last year and how he was the number 1 wide receiver in that offense, but regardless, both those guys put up top 10 fantasy football wide receiver numbers. So I think they can do it again, and I think the separation won't be that much. In fact, I have Mike Evans slightly ahead of Chris Godwin. I like his big playability. I like his touchdown upside. But what you can't deny right now is that he's being absolutely undervalued. The 28th pick. So that is 2 picks before the end of the 3rd round. That would be, by my calculations, the 4th pick in the 3rd round in a 12-team league, which, again, is very late in and of itself. And afterwards, you saw Allen Robinson, then our picks of Adam Thielen and Amari Cooper, then A.J. Brown. Mark Ingram being selected afterwards, I absolutely hate that pick. The fact that Chris Carson was still there, Leonard Fournette was still there, and Mark Ingram was the choice, I think there's going to be major regression for Mark Ingram with J.K. Dobbins there, just general touchdown decrease in those totals. So for that reason, Mark Ingram pretty much on my do not draft list, especially at his current ADP. Then you see DJ Moore, Kyler Murray. So seeing him a little bit earlier than I would have anticipated, especially this being a 10-team league. Then Leonard Fournette, Chris Carson, good value on those guys. Juju Smith. I'm shocked to see Jonathan Taylor that early. But what I'm really shocked about right now is that, look at some of these names. Cooper Kupp lasted all the way until the 5th round. Look, I know that he has some consistency issues, but he has very much so got top 10 wide receiver upside. And in PPR formats, it's, to me, it's almost a no-brainer that he should be at worst, like a 3rd round pick, something like that. But it's our turn to draft again, and I love our options, honestly. So we're going to go with James Conner here of the Pittsburgh Steelers. We've already locked up our starting 2 running backs, but having James Conner as a flex option is absolutely sensational. Now, I could go ahead and get another running back in a David Montgomery or in a Devin Singletary, David Johnson. Johnson would probably be the guy that I prioritize, but I'm looking at Calvin Ridley. I know that he won't be available to me the following round, and I think he's going to have a breakout type of year, so I'm just going to go ahead and get him here. Now, like I said before, depending on the formats in the league styles that you guys have, maybe Ridley isn't a bench player, maybe he's your second flex spot, the way that our roster currently looks. But either way, I realize again that this is a 10-team league, so teams are going to be a lot more top heavy and a lot more, big name based, because right from the get-go, we've got Kenyon Drake, Josh Jacobs, Amari Cooper, and Adam Thielen, which is sensational. But this is where in these 10-team leagues, you have to do a little bit more due diligence, maybe go with some safer picks to some extent, because you know that a lot of players, a lot of team members are going to have a loaded roster. So to some extent, you want to, in the first couple of rounds at least, get some safer type of players, and then later on shoot your shot with those high upside players where, for the most part, the draft really is won. But let's go ahead and get back to the results at this point in time, because in 10 more picks, it'll be our turn. And just to recap that 5th round before we took James Conner, we saw T.Y. Hilton, Cooper Kupp, Melvin Gordon. Again, I wouldn't be taking Melvin Gordon before James Conner. No shot for that to happen. Melvin Gordon has got Phillip Lindsay and Royce Freeman. Then Devontae Parker, Keenan Allen, Mark Andrews, Le'Veon Bell, Zach Ertz, Robert Woods. So nothing too crazy there. Then you see our selection of Calvin Ridley. Then DeAndre Swift. Again, I know there's every single year a lot of hype on these rookie running backs, and that just happens because it's the most important position in fantasy football, the running back position. But guys, I keep saying this, these rookie running backs right now are in, for the most part, awful situations, all of them, in some type of running back by committees, and they're going to have to rely on the veteran presence alongside them to get injured or to miss some time for them to really make their presence felt. Because I look at DeAndre Swift and the fact that Raheem Mostert and David Montgomery are available, along with David Johnson as well, has me scratching my head why in the hell DeAndre Swift would be getting selected there. That makes zero sense. Maybe it was an auto pick, maybe something like that. But for the most part, everyone here is drafting, and we haven't had any issues. So again, this is my personal opinion. I've said it multiple times for this fantasy season. Go ahead and pump the brakes on the rookie running backs for 2020 fantasy football. Then afterwards, we see some of those other running backs that we really like in David Montgomery, David Johnson afterwards, Aaron Rodgers. Wow, at the end of the round there, that is extremely surprising, all things considered. A lot of people have Aaron Rodgers outside of their top 10 quarterbacks, including myself. Now, he might be right on that fringe, but having him go where he just did at the end of the 6th round, I believe, that is absolutely unbelievable, honestly, considering some of the other names that are still there. And just look, for example, Russell Wilson. Now, this is where you're going to start to see some crazy things, and you're going to be able to see the fact that some people are on auto pick because we already have the San Francisco defense off the board. But let's go ahead and look at our options here. I'm going to go ahead and go to tight end, and I'm going to go ahead and get my guy. I believe in Evan Ingram. I'll go ahead and ensure that position afterwards because obviously there is an injury risk with Ingram, but I'm going to go ahead, take care of that now. Then let's go ahead and look at our quarterback situation. 2 guys that I'm pretty much considering, Drew Brees, Matt Ryan. I'm going to go ahead and go with Matt Ryan, kind of combine him with a Calvin Ridley to get that bump up, in the scenarios that Calvin Ridley scores a touchdown. So both him and Matt Ryan get that touchdown bonus. I do like that. Usually I like to go with the combination for running back and quarterback, but we don't have the luxury of doing that here. So we go with wide receiver quarterback combination. And just like that, we've got our roster filled out. Let's go ahead and go to our roster here. And as you can see, better view, Matt Ryan, Adam Thielen, Amari Cooper, Kenyon Drake, Josh Jacobs, Evan Ingram, James Conner, Calvin Ridley. And we're gonna go a little bit deeper here because, like I said, this is a 10-team league. It's going by a little bit faster. There's going to be some more talent available in later rounds than normal. So we're going to continue the exercise for a little bit. We'll see if it gets too crazy in terms of kickers and defenses going. We'll point that out. But let's go ahead and continue this train. Look at the draft results again after our Matt Ryan selection. You can make the argument that we reached on Matt Ryan, and I wouldn't necessarily disagree with you. It's just that, to me, Matt Ryan and Drew Brees were by far the next 2 best quarterbacks, and I didn't want to take the chance of neither one being available to us. And with the way that these mock drafts are, sometimes there's going to be a run on quarterbacks, especially if you get more auto drafts in here the later that we go. So for that reason, we went ahead, nabbed Matt Ryan. But let's discuss potentially who our other quarterback choices would have been if not Matt Ryan and Drew Brees. I've said before, I'm a big fan of the NFC South, so Tom Brady, another choice. I do like a Carson Wentz. Matthew Stafford is going to be in someone that under the radar. When healthy, he's a great option. I like Ben Roethlisberger again when healthy. Daniel Jones could be a nice second-year quarterback option as well. Someone that isn't afraid to throw the football. But let's look at our big board now in terms of all the names that are still there, not just the quarterbacks, and see if there are any that kind of stick out. You see Darius Guice, you see a Jared Cook, Jarvis Landry, Kareem Hunt potentially. Let's go ahead and sort it by wide receiver, and then let's go ahead and sort it out by running back afterwards. And a guy that I've been consistently getting across all my leagues, a guy that's going much later than he should be, that's being undervalued, is Brandon Cooks in my eyes. I've said it before, I think he will be the number one wide receiver for the Houston Texans. Not Kenny Stills, not Will Fuller. I believe it will be Brandon Cooks. So I'm going to go ahead and queue him up because we are next in terms of draft order. So he will be one of our selections, no doubt about it. Let's look at what happened in that previous round. We saw Matt Ryan, Tyler Higbee, Diggs, Hunter Henry, Michael Gallup, Breda, Sony Michel. Then you see a little bit craziness with Justin Tucker going off the board, Josh Allen, J.K. Dobbins. Let's go ahead and draft Brandon Cooks really quickly before the timer runs out on us. Then you see Christian Kirk, Pittsburgh defense. Again, some craziness there. So I'm going to go ahead here and go back to running backs and continue to shore up or just add more depth, honestly. I think Kareem Hunt, not a bad choice, all things considered. This is a PPR format after all. And, I mean, we've already got Kenyon Drakes, Josh Jacobs, James Conner. So just adding more depth, never a bad thing. I think Kareem Hunt could be a nice flex option, especially, I should point out, in full point PPR options more so because that will be his role on the Cleveland Browns offense. Now, I've said it before, depending on what happens in Tampa Bay, the running back situation there is a lot of potential for either a Keyshawn Vaughn or a Ronald Jones. Marlon Mack is still on the board. I know he doesn't bring much to the table as far as pass-catching running backs go, but I would say right now that him and Jonathan Taylor should be viewed pretty much in the same breath. I don't think either one has a huge leg up over the other. They're expected to be used as a 1-2 punch. And if, Jonathan Taylor goes, just making this up, with the 45th pick or the 50th pick overall, I believe Marlon Mack should be right afterwards there with the 51st pick overall, because I think the separation will be that little between those two guys. Now, let's go ahead and, again, take a look back at what has happened afterwards here with some of the selections. Carson Wentz, good value after that Kareem Hunt selection. Then you see Harrison Butker, Julian Edelman. Again, Julian Edelman that late, pretty good value. It won't be sexy, it won't be flashy, but Edelman will probably still get you close to 1,000 yards. The ceiling, not that high, this being a half-point PPR format. And obviously, we all know Tom Brady no longer there, so that entire offense is risky. Then you see John Brown. I think that's a good value pick as well. I don't think the separation between him and Stephon Diggs will be all that much. Jonnu Smith, Tom Brady, another good selection here late as far as quarterbacks are concerned. And now you're going to start to see kind of that run on defenses, kickers, because people have started to fill out the majority of their rosters, so other positions are going to start to get filled out, and those are the positions that are still empty, which is kicker and defense. But like I said before, we have already filled out the core of our roster here, and I'm pretty happy with how this turned out. The only thing that I could say that would have been better, I mentioned it in the third round, if Mike Evans had somehow fallen to us. If you guys are, in 10-person leagues and towards the end of the third round, so basically picking with that 8th, 9th, 10th pick overall, and Mike Evans is still there, that should be the fastest draft click ever. That guy, again, I keep saying it, he's being extremely undervalued. The separation between him and Chris Godwin won't be that much. If honestly, if I was able to draft him and then get Adam Thielen or Amari Cooper, I feel pretty confident saying that this is an A type of roster. Right now, though, I still don't hate it. I think it's, very B plus, A minus type of roster. I love what we have at quarterback. I love what we have at running back with Kenyon Drake, with Josh Jacobs, with James Conner, having Kareem Hunt for depth as well. Then wide receivers, Adam Thielen, Amari Cooper, Calvin Ridley, and Brendan Cooks. Like I said, I like to think of this as if there were that second flex spot, because usually some 10-team leagues might do that as a way to circumvent the fact that they have two less players in their league. But let's go ahead and get back to our selection here. And you know what? I'm going to go ahead and take a chance on one of these Tampa Bay running backs at this point in time. Why not? I'm going to go ahead and draft Ronald Jones at this point in time. I keep going back and forth on whether it's going to be Jones, whether it's going to be Vaughn. It could be either one of those guys. I think that's just one of those situations where we have to wait and see. And afterwards now, I'm going to go ahead and get that backup tight end that I mentioned once we selected Evan Ingram. And it's been, I think, 5, 6, maybe even 7 rounds after the selection of Evan Ingram. And we still are able to get our guy in Jack Doyle, someone that I think has standalone startable value. And if something happens to Evan Ingram, I have zero issues plugging in Jack Doyle, playing him on a week-to-week basis. We know how much Phillip Rivers loves his tight ends, and behind T.Y. Hilton, Jack Doyle is the most reliable pass catcher on that Colts offense. So that pretty much kind of takes us towards the end of this draft. We've got, if you think about it, one more bench spot to fill, and then a kicker and a defense. For the sake of this exercise, we're not going to be taking a kicker or a defense. Let's look at our draft results really quickly. By round, right before we made that Ronald Jones selection, we saw Marlon Mack. Good value there on Mack, like we mentioned before, considering where Jonathan Taylor is going. Then Jack Doyle, Darius Slayton, Matthew Stafford. Good value on Stafford. Marvin Jones, Noah Fant, Jerry Jeudy. Philip Lindsay, not a bad value, all things considered. If something does happen to Melvin Gordon, he is that next man up. Darrell Henderson and Austin Hooper. And we are kicking off the next round here shortly. And if I had to go ahead and queue up some players at this point in time, this is maybe where you take a chance on a Alexander Madison or some of those handcuffs, especially with the news coming out about Dalvin Cook's contract situation. I think this is the first mock that we've done since those news broke. So that's something to consider. Obviously, we don't have Dalvin Cook right now, so it's a little bit tough to invest a pick in Alexander Madison otherwise. But let's look at some of our other options. I like a Mike Gesicki that is here as far as other tight ends available, but we've already got 2 on our roster, so we don't need to add any more. We could add a second quarterback, but again, I think that's kind of reaching. I'd rather go ahead and take a look at what we have at wide receiver, what we have at running back, and just looking at some of these names. Sterling Shepard, not a bad choice. Anthony Miller, I'm not so sold on the situation at quarterback in Chicago, but Deontay Johnson, not a bad option. Alshon Jeffrey, not a bad option. Mecole Hardman, not a bad option. So I think there's still some value to be had here. I'm going to go ahead and queue up some of these names to see if they are still available. So Deontay Johnson will be one of those names. And we can also put Alshon Jeffrey on that list. Let's see what is left at running back and then wrap this thing up, because like I said, we've got the majority of our roster taken care of, and we've got a pretty good idea of the grade that we are going to give this roster as well. So let's go ahead and draft Deontay Johnson. That's taken care of. I guess we can go ahead and add a second quarterback, but no, I mean, I'm looking at the options here. It's not really the most pressing thing. Looking at running back, we can go ahead and add someone like a James White for his pass catching ability in New England. I think that's right now, all things considered, the guys that are available, probably the most logical choice. So we're going to go ahead and do that. And let's look at our roster. Let's look at our team. So again, to recap, our first selections back to back. That's the nice thing about, you know, the final pick in the first round, especially in these smaller league sizes. You're going to have a deeper pool of players available to you at the turn. Kenyon Drake and Josh Jacobs. Then Adam Thielen and Amari Cooper. I'm not mad about that. You know, you could make an argument that maybe it should have been a Cooper Kupp instead of an Amari Cooper, but I like how it turned out there. Then afterwards, I believe it was James Conner and Calvin Ridley. Ecstatic to get those guys in the 5th and 6th round, respectively. But again, be prepared for some bigger names to be available in later rounds when you are in 10-team leagues. Then afterwards, we went with Matt Ryan, Evan Ingram. Then we started to shore things up, you know, getting a Brendan Cooks, getting a Kareem Hunt, getting a Ronald Jones, Jack Doyle. So honestly, I really like the depth of our team. Even if this was a 2-flex type of starting roster, I'd be perfectly fine inserting, you know, either Calvin Ridley, either Brendan Cooks, potentially Kareem Hunt, potentially a Ronald Jones or Deontay Johnson in my starting lineup. So I absolutely really love the way that this turned out. And all things considered, like I said before, I think we get a B plus, maybe I'll even go A minus type of roster. I think the offenses that we targeted are high octane offenses. The guys that we got from those offenses are probably the first option on those offenses. And sure, you know, there might be some injury risk with an Evan Ingram, but that's why we back it up with a Jack Doyle. There might be some injury risk in a James Conner, but that's why we have a Calvin Ridley potentially to plug in, or a Kareem Hunt, or a Brendan Cooks. So I think we insured ourselves pretty well. And all things considered, this turned out nicely for having that final pick in the 10th round. I think this could be a nice strategy for people to employ, going just immediately at the turn, running back, then going wide receiver to shore things up. And if you have some, you know, some really talented players afterwards drop to you, even better. But for now, that's it, folks. Let us hear it in the comment section. Did you agree, disagree with our selection of these players, along with any other fantasy questions you guys might have? And another quick reminder for all of you interested, check out the description on all the details on how to get the 2020 ADP Fantasy Football Draft Guide now. And if you enjoyed, hit that like button, subscribe. But in the meantime, we'll see you guys in future videos.